We stand on the edge of profound change. To meet the demands of a green transition, we need collective wisdom, diverse voices, and bold ideas. Collaboration is the key to unlocking our sustainable future. Together, we can overcome the challenges ahead and seize the opportunities that will define the green economy.
Thank you all for joining us. The scope for AI's influence on climate is almost unimaginably vast, from monitoring emissions and treaties to predicting floods and modelling climate change. But it is also a thirsty beast. The power demands of data centres globally by 2026 are expected to match the power demands of the whole of Japan. So, nodding back to something that Nigel said earlier, this is the problem that we have to learn to love. And I'm very glad to say that we have a hugely well-informed and insightful panel with us. This is one of those panels where the introduction could take almost as long as the panel itself. So I'm going to skim lots, but just to say that we have GENNAI, a globally renowned authority in responsible AI, who founded responsible innovation at Google and co-wrote the tech giant's AI principles. She's influenced key regulations, including the EU AI Act, speaks at UNESCO and Davos, and is now head of responsible AI at T3. Dr. MICHAL NACHMANY is the founder and CEO of Climate Policy Radar. She advises the UN-led initiative on climate action transparency, and is a visiting fellow at the Grantham Research Institute at LSE. Marie EKELAND's journey in French tech began at ELMAN Partners, where she spotted digital ad platform Criteo and advised it to a €250 million IPO and beyond, before founding France Digital and becoming the first woman in Europe to create a €150 million VC fund. Today, she is the co-founder and CEO of 2050, an investment fund focused on environmental and financial issues. And Adam ELMAN is Google's Director of Sustainability for EMEA and has been recognised as one of the UK's top 100 environmental professionals and among the top 50 sustainability thought leaders globally. So the headline is, we have a council of the wise before you to tackle some of the big questions. So we start typically with the risks before we look to the opportunities. So I wonder, Jen, if I could start with you by asking whether the right rules are in place to ensure big tech mitigates the climate risks of AI.
I'll start with a certainly no. So there's a lot of regulations around transparency reporting, around obviously ESG and other climate requirements, but reporting is insufficient for especially the AI in the generative AI world. As you mentioned, the energy that's used by AI and generative AI is now at the country level and will continue to increase at that level unless more work is done. And we'll get to the opportunities that AI can be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. But in terms of the regulations, and while I was still at Google, part of our AI principles that Matt mentioned did call out the need to specify that AI needs to be built in service of social goals, not just commercial goals, but social goals as well. And part of those principles had that as an aspirational goal, is be socially beneficial. But on the other end, we also spoke about how it could not cause overall harm. And what that inherent tension is that by creating AI that could be useful for solving problems that we've never been able to solve before, but it will come at a cost to the environmental footprint. And so a lot lot of work happening to manage that risk. I'm talking about that because part of my role was around AI risk and governance. It is now, as I work with many companies around the globe around their AI efforts too, but it's insufficient. So when I say that it's necessary but insufficient, essentially internal regulation, internal governance of ensuring that you're assessing the footprint of the AI that you use. I would also say it starts before that, which is, do you need to use AI? There's many problems that can still be solved by traditional, whether it's models or statistics or otherwise. You should only be using AI if you have a business case that requires AI to be used. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity, but given the cost of the environmental footprint, you need to be assessing that. I'd also consider that part of that internal regulation and internal governance is to close some of the gaps that is not coming from external regulation. Understanding not just the cost of the AI that you're using, but to the degree, how can you minimize the amount of energy that you're using day to day? How to minimize the size of the models that you're using. There's a lot of really great research happening there to understand you don't just need more and more data, larger and larger models, because they use more and more energy. So how can we get as accurate, as useful AI while reducing the footprint? So overall, no, regulation is not there. Global standards are not there. When you look at the standards that are being developed, whether it's ISO, IEEE, you look at the EU AI Act and otherwise, they talk about the safety of AI. They talk about preventing fairness and harm, which are all good things. They don't carve out specific requirements and expectations around environmental and energy usage, which I think is a massive gap and does mean that, no, I don't think there's sufficient regulation, but internal regulation governance is necessary, insufficient. We know that we can't trust big tech companies to always put all of us ahead of social goals, and so I do think it's a meeting in the middle, the private and public partnership, internal governance and regulation. There needs to be stronger regulation that specifically calls out AI usage, generative AI usage in energy requirements and environmental expectations.
MICHAL, you wanted to step in?
I have a yes and a yes but. My yes and, emissions are critical. Let's not forget water. Let's not forget critical minerals. Let's not forget the labor that is associated with training models. That's the yes and. So the impact and the footprint of generative AI, and not just generative AI, we're used to thinking about generative AI, but the AI is bigger than generative AI. That's the yes and. There is a huge, huge footprint to AI. The yes but, everything you said is true, but it's true for data centers. And data centers do many more things than AI. And the fraction, and things they do, they host websites, they host financial transactions, they power Facebook and Twitter and all of the things that have very little to do with training models for AI and using AI. The emissions associated or the environmental footprint associated with AI is a fraction of the emissions associated with data centers. So when we talk about numbers, it is important to mention that. It is important to mention that because when we think about AI is equaling the emissions of Japan, we potentially are doing a disservice to the discourse and in our ability to say, what are we actually putting one against each other? And when we think about what are the benefits of AI, which we will be talking about in a second, then we think that then we need to make sure that the values that we put in the columns are actually equal.
Adam, this is a good time to bring you in, I think. Big tech has taken matters into its own hands to a certain degree. Microsoft recommissioned 3 Mile Island to generate electricity from nuclear. Google and Amazon have signed deals for their own small nuclear reactors. I wonder if you think that is a trend. Most of the discussion has been about the pros and cons of nuclear in general, which I think most of the people in this room will understand. But I wonder if that's a trend that you think we're likely to see continuing.
Thanks for the question. I think we need to sort of take a bigger context here, and I think we'll get on to the opportunities for AI, but equally important is managing and taking a responsible approach to any of the downside concerns. And it's something that Google's been focused on for many years. We've had AI principles for many, many years, and whilst we're sitting here talking about AI today, if you were using Google Maps, Google Search 5, 6, 7 years ago, you were using AI. I mean, Google's been focused on sustainability since the company was founded. We started buying clean energy back in 2010, 2017. On a global annual basis, we were buying enough clean energy to match our electricity use. And we're really focused on sort of every layer of the stack. So we have ambitious goals now. We're aiming for net zero by 2030. That's not just our own emissions, that's scope 3 as well, so our value chain. And we're aiming for an even higher standard on clean energy. So what I spoke about before, the way most people measure energy usage. You get to the end of the year and you say, how much energy did you use, and did you buy enough clean energy somewhere at some time to match that? We don't think that's good enough. So we're looking to buy energy on a 24/7 basis, so locally sourced, matched on an hourly basis. And that requires all sorts of new technology, whether it's advanced geothermal, battery storage, small modular reactors, through to using AI to load balance and shift jobs around the world. So we're absolutely focused on the energy side, but we're focused on every aspect. So we're focused on the chipsets. The latest TPU, our Trillium TPU, these are the chipsets that really are focused on training AI, is 67% more efficient than TPU5, and TPU5 was a lot more efficient than the one before. A typical Google data center, well, actually, put this in perspective. Compared to 5 years ago, we have almost 4 times as much compute power for the same amount of energy. So we're really good at efficiency. So we're focused on every layer of the stack here. And to the point I think just made before about really finding out where there are sensible use cases for AI, we mustn't forget there's a cost here. So there's a commercial incentive to drive efficiency and to make sure we're only using it at the points it really does add value.
Marie, it'd be great to bring you in here for the funding perspective. As VC money and big tech money itself rushes towards AI, I wonder if there is a risk that our AI systems could be rapidly scaled without fully considering that environmental impact. If we know that the regulations aren't necessarily there in place at the moment, is that a risk? Is that something that you're aware of and people discuss in your world?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not only a risk for AI, it's a risk for tech in general. And we used to talk about growth at all cost. It means what it means, that there is an environmental and social cost for a lot of, sometimes for a lot of these companies. And so the question then is, how can you actually build financial models where you are building not growth at all cost, but aligned growth, meaning growth that of companies that are aligning their business interests together with the interests of society and the planet. That actually means we need to be able to, in some way or another, assess net impact, right? And so it's not about having positive impact on this particular mission, but in making sure that the negative impact you can potentially have elsewhere is not costing more than the benefit you're actually having with the AI system. That's really hard to do today because we don't have kind of a standard net impact benchmark measurements to go with today, but there's some very interesting initiatives that are going on. So the way we do it, and the way we do it basically is that it's funny to talk about AI today because I usually say the way finance work is like machine learning. We're basically doing AI, except it's not machine, it's our minds that are set that way because it's all about pattern recognition. So we're looking at what has worked in the past, work meaning gaining a lot of money. And we're making decisions today that are based on this. So we're not only making decisions informed on that, but we're overfitting, meaning we're always going for the decision that made the most money. So we're kind of reproducing the past. And I don't see how we're going to solve the problems we're creating if we're making decisions that way. And today you could argue, yeah, but that's because if you just put in like environmental and social data in your algorithm, decision-making algorithm, you'll be fine because you can optimize on these 3 dimensions and you can have net impact in, except we don't have these data, right? So the way we do it is to look at the future, looking at what is the type of society we want to live in, and to have a holistic approach because that's the only way you can measure net impact and say, we want to invest in companies that are making us shape a fertile future, meaning it's a society where everyone can eat enough, eat healthily, where we can live and produce in a sustainable manner, where we can take care of our body and mind, where we can make the education and cultural model evolve in such a way that everyone can contribute to that fertile future, and where you can put trust back into the economy with insurance model covering us on new risk, financial model allowing long-term to happen, and media industry allowing democracy to function. You could put a lot of things in AI in that trust bucket, of course. So we always assess our companies based on this, and it's mostly bottom-up metrics, which is really hard after to have a net measurement, because then you're going to have, they're doing great on like tons of CO2 avoided in the atmosphere, but this is kind of diversity and inclusion. So overall, you don't have like this net impact measurements. But there is this Finnish platform called Upright, which has been built since 7 years. It was Anu, she's an ex-McKinsey, and the way they did it is that they mapped all the different industries with all the different products and services and linking them through science articles. So they're crawling all the science article out there to be able to link one particular product or service to a potential negative or positive impact. And then they crawl all the science database again to be able to map that impact towards a cost or a benefit. So it is limited to, you need to have an article saying Instagram has a bad negative impact on health, mental health, for example, to be able to say it. But you also need another scientific article saying, and that negative mental health impact is costing social security system that much per year. So translating into money, because if everything is translating into euros or dollars, then you can sum, right? And then they come up with an overall net impact. So today, that is actually not sufficient, but it's a very good starting point to be able to benchmark one company as an overall net impact positive. So, for example, one of our companies, which is doing decarbonized cement, they're taking carbon mineralization and olivine, and basically at the end you have cement that is storing CO2 instead of emitting CO2 in the process. And when you compare its positive, like its impact ratio, it's plus 68%, super positive. You compare it to Holcim, it's minus 91%. So it gives you an overall way of looking at it and making decisions.
And how common is it for your competitors, would you say, to focus on that net impact in the same way that you are?
It's hard because it's holistic. So usually we see people more focused on like one particular, or companies on one particular mission. But if we really want to solve this, we need to have this holistic mindset.
MICHAL, I wonder if I could ask you, before we move on to the huge opportunities, if there's a risk of over-reliance on AI in our thinking and policy making as this wonderful plaster that can go over everything and will mitigate everything and might distract us from bigger structural issues?
I think anyone who's been around for the last 2 years is, we drop the word AI everywhere, but we are still not having a very nuanced debate about what it is, and we're still treating it like a monolithic thing. We can think about AI's emissions, we can think about AI for social good. You can have very good applications, very good models, and very bad models that are for social good. And the risk, by the way, is having an application or a model that is designed for social good, but is a bad model, relies on bad data, relies on data that is biased, doesn't have the evaluation metrics to make sure that the decisions that, or the modeling or the predictions that it makes are actually fit for purpose, fit for truth, fit for all of the use cases that it's used to. If you train data on Global North English language text, then the language that it will produce for Pashto texts will be not as good, or even for French texts would not be as good. So we could actually end up with the wrong decisions. We could end up with the wrong predictions. And if we think about AI as this black box, or you either have it or you don't, this is where we need to start having a more structured discussion, a more nuanced discussion about these things, and to dig underneath the what is it for, and is it going in the right direction, but what does it actually do? And these are very, very thorny subjects, because data is a big part of that, funding data collection in areas where it hasn't been collected, modeling things that haven't been modeled before, and being actually able to test and evaluate them. These are heavy engineering, data sciencey, data engineering tasks. And part of our problem is that we don't have the work, we don't have the people who are trained enough, because everything is very new and we have very little to do except be at the forefront and innovate and build and kind of write the playbook as we're, build the airplane as we're flying it, I think is the high emissions equivalent of that. So all of these are critical. So if we say AI yes or no, relying on it or no, let's do AI, great. Then we're at a risk of over-reliance on that. And going back to Marie's excellent point about artificial intelligence is human intelligence, which is like the ability to retrieve lots of data fast and make informed decisions based on it, right? That's what we consider intelligence. machine intelligence or artificial intelligence is the ability to draw on larger data sets and make sense of them faster. Now, today is a particularly good day to talk about multiple issues in humanity, right? Nature and science, and nature and climate change and human rights and war and peace and all of those things that happen in these silos, and the ability to digest all of the information related to them and bring them closer so we can make holistic decisions is critical. But I'm going to opportunities already, so I'll let you moderate the panel.
Well, that is a good time to ask. That is a good time to ask, because the opportunities are so vast, from more energy efficiency to monitoring our emissions to modelling climate change itself. I think this is really a question that I'd like to ask each of you, which is, which areas do you think it's likely to have the most profound impact on in terms of our fight against climate change the soonest? Where's the hope?
I'll get started. So I'm a rule of three person, so I was trying to think of 3 ones here, but the key ones that come to mind, and when I was listening to the earlier panel on the small and medium enterprises, I must have been bringing too much of my Irishness to it, because I thought agriculture and farming would be one of the key areas, and I think it was construction that was mentioned, but precision agriculture and the ability for AI to help us do more with less, especially in a water-stressed world and a much hotter world. I think AI and its ability to analyze information at scale, as well as help us think in creative ways of how to use the resources that we already have. I think precision agriculture across so much of the world is not just a useful use case of AI, a necessary one of how we do that with less water and more heat. Second one that comes to mind, you've already said it maybe with the monitoring, is energy grid and smart grid management. So better being able to manage the loads, again, in a very constrained environment, and with more heat waves and the usage of air conditioning, whatever it is, that more as people's GDP increases, their ability to pay for these types of energy intensive ways of both adapting to a changing world and then needing to respond, not just adapt, but also respond and mitigate it. I think the massive amount of differences for national grids and regional grids is going to be a huge opportunity for AI to help. And then the third one being buildings, both industrial buildings and home buildings, around cooling, heating and lighting, and how to do that. All of those are needed right now, and some of the technology already exists with smart homes. Being able to connect that all together, I think, related to the point around being holistic and having a comprehensive approach, being able to build smart buildings and managing that lighting, heating and cooling is an immediate opportunity, because so much of the infrastructure already exists in that particular space, while the others might need a bit more research.
Adam?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I mean, we spent some time looking at this last year with Boston Consulting Group, and we identified that existing use cases for AI in climate, so forget the breakthroughs we might get next month, next year, but existing use cases, if scaled up, have the opportunity to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by up to 10% by 2030. That's huge. That's the same as the emissions as the EU. And there are lots of examples right across all sorts of different industries. And that's obviously mitigation, but huge opportunity for climate adaptation and resiliency, but also fundamental modelling, research breakthroughs, etc. We see 3 main use cases there around sort of information, prediction, and optimization. Again, lots of examples from Google, but I'll just throw out a few. So in the transportation side of things, if you use Google Maps to drive, we're using AI to surface up the most fuel-efficient route if it's not already the fastest one. So you'll see a little green leaf. We launched that a couple of years ago. That's helped reduce 2.6 million metric tons of emissions. That's the same as taking 650,000 fuel-based cars off the road every single year. So that's just helping people make simple choices every day. You mentioned flying. If you've ever seen the sort of thin white lines behind an aircraft, those are called contrails. They actually account for 1/3 of the emissions from flying. So after fuel, which is 50%, contrails are the next biggest thing. We've been using AI and geospatial data to predict and figure out when contrails occur. We've tested this in the real world with American Airlines, and we reduced contrails by 54%. We're now deploying this around the world and here in Europe with Eurocontrols. Many examples across the energy sector, but I also think it's important, as I say, to mention the sort of adaptation resiliency side of things. Obviously, flooding, very top of mind given the horrific events in Spain over the last week. We've been using AI for a number of years to predict riverine flooding. The technology's got so good we can predict riverine flooding now up to 7 days in advance, and we've deployed that to 80 countries around the world, covering 460 million people. I think what's really interesting here is because of the advancement in AI, we've now been able to deploy it in countries where there's just really scarce data, often those countries that are most impacted by climate change, but actually the modeling's got so good now we were able to deploy it. So I think there are lots and lots of use cases, and you know, at Google, as well as sort of building our own, we're really keen to help support a huge ecosystem, whether that's through sort of philanthropic funding, and we've been working closely together, but you know, through helping startups and what have you, because the opportunity is really exciting here, and you know, we're going to lead that ourselves as Google to reach our own goals as well.
This is a definitely yes and. So yes to everything that Jen and Adam were saying, but I'm going to attack it from a different angle. There's three things that we need to do. These are the three levers that we need to pull on to fix all of our problems. Policy, and moving money from the old economy to the new economy, and behavior change. Behavior change is made much easier when the policy is in place and when the money is in the right place. So the money in all of those things, in buildings and transportation and resilience and all of those. But in order to inform decision-making, AI can help in bringing and synthesizing the information that helps policymakers or helps financiers actually decide how to move either laws, policies, regulations, or to divest or invest in industries. Now, if you think about the information that policymakers use in order to make a decision, that often starts with who's done that already and how can I de-risk it and what do I know about it and what do I know about its impact. And that often is a very data-rich exercise, and because we don't have enough data or we didn't have enough data, this is where AI can help, then people stay in the status quo. You don't know enough about it, you stick to what you know. And the status quo is not good enough. And the ability to bring together and to bring to decision makers information about, here's who's done this already, here are the impacts, here's a bunch of deforestation policies, here's deforestation satellite imagery, see how this starts impacting that, right? Same way that if you think about health policies, countries that mandated COVID vaccines saw a drop in COVID cases, right? So like starting to map between regulation and policy and what works. There's detailed work on that, for example, out of MIT now, mapping IRA investments and thinking how at the facility level, those things actually drive decarbonization. So the ability to map the implementation of policy is the key to shifting policy, which is great. Similarly for finance decisions, if you think about finance through a risk perspective, being able to map all of the data that goes into the risk modeling, including policy data, by the way. The hurricane is coming, great. Do we have an early warning system for that hurricane? And what is going to be the reduction in the losses or the increase in the losses with and without policy interventions? This is where we start seeing the interplay between those two. If we are able to predict loss of value on housing stocks, because we know that in 10 years from now this is going to be a flooded area. These are all things that enable more smart and more informed finance decisions. This is insurance and lending and investment, of course, that can change these things right now with long-term predictions. Again, going back to the data, this needs to sit on solid data. The modeling is great, it doesn't sit on solid data, it's not great. And then the decisions are wrong and we think that we made the right decision and we're going to regret it later. And behavior change, so the ability to choose your trail, your route to driving to work or flying with or without contrails or with or without airlines that have taken measures to reduce their contrails, for example. Those are, again, heavily reliant on investment and on policy. And the final thing I'm going to say is the ability to bring all of those decisions. This is where I'm getting back to the de-siloing. Last week, COP16, the biodiversity COP, concluded in Cali. Next week, COP29. The climate COP is starting. Great. Why aren't these people in the same room? They're supposed to read the same documents. They're supposed to read the same modeling. They're supposed to say, this is for climate, this is for nature, this is for food, this is for human rights, in the same instance. The ability to synthesize information quickly and to be able to bring it all together, this is one of the opportunities that AI can bring for us.
Marie?
Yeah, so when we started looking at solutions for climate change, we digged into the problems first to understand, right? So we digged into science. And we were very surprised with what we got, which is that if you listen to Stockholm Resilience Center or to all these research institutes that are really at the forefront of projection for the planet, what they tell you is that the number one thing we should be doing is not reducing emissions. So that was the surprise. The number thing we should be doing is to restore nature's capacity to store carbon. So it's about how can we get our soils, our oceans, our trees, and mineral rocks, who are the main natural carbon sinks, to improve and increase their capacity to store carbon. Because if we don't do that, what we're doing by getting them more and more restrained is that not only are we harming the planet's capacity to absorb our emission in time, but on top of that, we are releasing emissions that were stored for thousands of years in the atmosphere. So there's a compound effect that whatever in every projection, every scenarios that we move forward to, whatever the level of reduction of emissions, if we don't do that, we're doomed. So the question around us and the way we look at AI is how we can get AI work into solving these huge problems of restoring natural carbon sinks. And the number one thing we should be doing is to look at the oceans. The ocean is the SDG that is the least invested ever, but 2 breaths out of 3 that we take are coming from the ocean. It's 30% of the CO2 that is stored, and it is 3 billion people that are relying on the ocean just to sustain. And today we're not tackling that problem, and one of the reasons we're not doing it is that we don't have data that is interoperable, that we can really rely on to understand where there's no life, where we should be restoring life and biodiversity, and that is a huge issue. So I believe the one thing we should be building with the new AI, and that is something we have to do, is how can we get AI to help us out into making the ocean live again, because our planet is so much dependent on the ocean.
So there's a lot that keeps coming back to the question of the data that's fed in, obviously, and I wonder what we should be doing more of to make sure that business and finance and governments cooperate with each other and work together. This is all constantly evolving. The innovators are a bit ahead of the legislators at the moment. So I wonder how all of those parties can ensure they're working together in the most effective ways to make sure that the potential of AI is maximised in the fight against climate change. Who would like to lead that one off?
Happy to kick off. I mean, I think it's fundamental. I think partnership is absolutely key here. I mean, like Google is an information company, but we don't own all this information. We work with partners around the world to bring together information and make it universally accessible and useful. And that's very much the case for this topic as well. I think sort of tying that together and maybe talking about cities, because cities have this big issue. They have huge ambitions around climate change and sustainability and nature and biodiversity, but often lack the data to know what are the right decisions that they're doing, that they need to make. We partner with organisations like C40, the Global Covenant of Mayors, EKELAND, many others, so city-based experts, where they really bring a lot of data, they bring the expertise. We bring our own data, we bring our technology expertise, and that enables us to deliver solutions to cities that are really helpful. So, for example, we have a free platform, covers 42,000 cities globally, gives them all sorts of data on their transport emissions, their building emissions, where to increase solar, where to plant trees to deal with urban heat islands. So if you take Ireland, for example, City of Dublin has an ambition to increase cycling by, I think it's 20%. They're using the Environmental Insights Explorer platform to help inform both their policy decisions and their investment decisions to help them reach that goal. And the really exciting thing is they can track that data every year. Is it actually making the impact that they want? So, but I go back, it's all about partnership. None of us can do this alone. We've also done a lot of work, I would say, in trying to identify what are some of the big missing data sets that would really help with climate science and advancing some of these. And we've sort of made that publicly available with others to say, look, here, make this stuff available. This is what we scientists, researchers around the world need to advance this topic.
Open data is the headline. If you think about the last Nobel Prizes that were given, they were given based on innovations that were only possible because data was there, because data was mandated to be made open. The mRNA vaccines and other innovations that are critical to our well-being as humanity and as a society, not just humanity, other species as well, is only enabled when you make years and decades of open and collaborative data, and you create an infrastructure on which it can be shared. So if you think about it, the data that we're all talking about is a public good, and public goods should be in the public. So opening up data sets and figuring out what are the business models that are necessary in order to make that happen, because creating data sets costs money, no one is denying that. But being able to ask, what is it that we can do? How can we create this shared infrastructure on the basis of which everyone who collects data sets, I don't know, you're sitting in a forest and you are monitoring deforestation, or you're monitoring species in a specific area, or a species sighting. Of course, that can be very dangerous because someone can then go and poach that species. So there's privacy, and there's lots of considerations for that. But open data is critical in order to facilitate innovation. And more than that, it is critical in order to open the data in order to reduce bias. If we are saying that models are only good if they are non-biased, then if I have a black boxed model and that's based on black box data, then who knows what this model does and says and how accurate it is going to be and how damaging it may be. Opening up the data and opening up the model, so I'm moving from open data to open source in this field, is critical in order to ensure that. And that's it, I'll stop here.
I'll build on both those points and add a bit of I might disagree slightly with there's a lack of data. There's a lack of data in some areas, but there's also a huge amount of data that is not being leveraged, and that data is also not being collected, centralized, and accessed. So the notion of kind of data trust, being able to provide, open source, but it would be a collective, that it's not, oh, that group will provide us all data. It's like, no, you make yourself part of the group, that people have to acknowledge that it's a shared responsibility to provide the data, and then yes, it's a shared responsibility to make it available, useful, clean, and then using it for a particular use case. So I think people aren't looking across the kind of life cycle of data to say they do play a role, and even if they think they don't have enough data, many government agencies have some data, but no one is looking at it, either because they don't have the skills. We'll give it to someone else who does have the skills. So I think there are ways that we can think about the gaps. I really like that addressing of the gaps for data access, but I also think it's data collection, that there's more than people think there is. And I'd also argue to the point about preventing bias and the need for more data. If we think about the lack of resources, lack of compute or infrastructure maybe in the global south, who need to be included, deserve to be included, critical to be included, especially in the changing world, we also think about what information do they already have. They may not have technical sensors across agriculture or monitoring climate change, but they have museums and libraries and archives. How do we digitize all of that and then make that available? That's already information that's available. So I do think there needs to be a recognition that data lives somewhere. It's about doing it in a privacy-protecting, secure way that then can be open sourced in a way that prevents bias. So I do think there's a lot that needs to be done on the shared responsibility acknowledgement side, not just on, and now we'll make it available. And I think more of us can play a role in that.
I remembered my last point, which you all saw that I forgot. There's an issue of climate justice, which goes beyond digitizing archives, which is critical, and all of that. There are small groups who need to use that data for local climate action who cannot pay for it. When a group called Milieu Defensi took Shell to court, I think there's a hearing next week, again, in their appeal, because they lost the first time, and said that, took them over brutal violations of human rights. I don't need to explain why Shell violates human rights by digging for oil, right? Shell had a team of 1,100 lawyers, while the group that sued them had a team of about 10 lawyers. That some of them had access to LexisNexis and the ability to reach data that can help them build their case, and way less paid than the Shell lawyers. Being able to have that data open and accessible and available, so the power imbalances can be changed, so the Davids can fight the Goliaths or any other power dynamic that you want to choose here, is critical for that, because right now we have a massive power imbalance that is damaging our ability both to reduce emissions and to generate resilience for the world.
I would just add one point, which is I fully concur to this open data need. especially because we don't have a lot of time. And also because it's not going to be global solutions, it's going to be multi-local solutions. So the capacity to understand if some place has the same type of context that we can learn from in our local context is super key. But I would just add one point, which is for these models and open data platforms to work, we need to innovate on the type of governance. And we definitely need stakeholder governance. And because else, this is not going to be resilient, and there's not going to be that trust built, and it's not going to be possible to build on top of that. So I think being able to tackle these topics are going to bring in new type of governance, stakeholder governance, that I think we should all be really aware of.
This is a conversation that could go on for a couple of days in itself, but I'm aware that there are others in the room who might have questions that they would like to ask. I see a hand up over here, if we could get a mic over, and one over here that we'll come to afterwards. We've only got a couple of minutes, but hi.
Thank you, fascinating discussion. Thank you also, Marie, for bringing up the prioritisation of nature protection. My name's Ed Pragnell, I work for a company called Credit Nature, so that was music to my ears. My question is for Adam. You talked a lot about the sort of energy efficiency, clean energy, your net zero strategy for 2030. Could you talk a bit about your impacts on other key ecosystem services within nature, such as water, biodiversity, and what you're doing to mitigate those impacts?
Yeah, no, happy. I mean, I think, we have a sustainability agenda that covers a wide variety of goals. And you're right, we've spoken a lot about sort of energy and emissions, but we've got goals that cover circularity, waste, biodiversity, nature, water, etc. Water's one where we've got a very big focus. So for those that don't know, data centers don't necessarily have to use water for cooling. We've got an ambitious goal to replenish 120% of the fresh water we use in our data centers. But again, we take a very contextual approach to that. So rather than sort of balance it across all data centers, where are the data centers that it really matters, where water is really stressed. But again, we invest in technologies where we don't need, there are some places where we use air cooling and what have you, where water doesn't make sense. Actually, and I should say in the US, where we have very big campuses, office campuses, we do a huge amount in terms of nature restoration, biodiversity, and we partner again with the experts in this space. I think what's really interesting is Google has something called Google Earth Engine, which you might have come across. It has petabytes, hundreds of petabytes worth of data, geospatial satellite data going back 4 or 5 decades now. And we've made that available to researchers and scientists around the world for a number of years. And much of the nature peer review science that comes out is based and uses Google Earth Engine. And so for us, as again, along with thinking about our own impacts, a lot of our thinking is how can we use the technology and make the data available to others, either on the scientific research side or to other organizations to advance their goals as well.
Thank you very much. We're rapidly approaching the end, and I have a large flashing red light in front of me. So it might be time that we take a break now for coffee. If everyone can be back by 3:30, we will be looking at the role of the US, very topical, obviously, national transition plans, and we'll be hearing from UN Climate Envoy Rachel Kite. Thank you.